Hi, and welcome to episode 88 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
I'm Heidi Parker. I'm a postdoc at the University of Texas at Austin.
I'm Tom Housley, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Exeter in Penryn.
And today we're joined by Beulah Garner, who is the Senior Curator of Coleoptera at the Natural History Museum in London, England. Hi, Beulah. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So even though I gave a kind of a hint at what you're doing currently, could you let everybody at home know what the Senior Curator of Coleoptera at the Natural History Museum does on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it makes me sound really, really grand, and I assure you I'm not, for one. It's a grand title, but there's not really much to back that up. I'm one of 5 curators here who work on the world's largest collection of beetles, I would say. We have about 10 million specimens, and that's growing every year because we have an active collecting policy, so we travel around the world collecting more beetles and hopefully to sort of disseminate science further. And yeah, I have a very varied role. I do a lot of scientific outreach, which is really important in this world of declining biodiversity. And I also am really essentially a sort of, what would I say, a custodian of knowledge, almost. The collection here is about 250 years old. So it goes back to the time of Sir Joseph Banks and the Sir James Captain Cook's voyages of the Endeavour. So we have a really, really long timeline of natural history diversity, and that in itself takes up most of my time in terms of curation. So I'm always in the collection, updating the taxonomy of certain species within the groups I work on. I'm a specialist in the Carabidae, which are the ground beetles, and also I have responsibility for the Chloroidea as well. So they're a much smaller group, but between 5 curators, we really have a big job to look after 10 million specimens.
Wow. So as you said, it's a very grand title, but it's also a very grand museum.
Sure.
It's definitely one of the most impressive natural history museums I've ever been to. Had you, I'm sure you traveled there as a child. Did you ever imagine, someday working there?
Oh my goodness me, no, never, ever, ever. I came here quite late. Even though I'm a newbie, I've been here 5 years, and I work with colleagues that have been here 40 years. And they go back to a time when they were called Sir. And I was hello, Mr. Thompson. I can call him Mr. Thompson, but back in the day he was Sir. And this colleague, he's 83, and he still curates the Cuculionides. He curates the weevils for us still. We couldn't be without him, but sadly one day we will. But yeah, this institution is awe-inspiring, and every day I have a crisis of confidence because I walk under a Diplodocus tail on my way to work. I've got Alfred Russel Wallace on one side, and I've got Charles Darwin on the other. And morning, Charles. And it always sort of keeps it real for me because I'm always mindful that anything that I do is building on the shoulders of giants. Really, it's a very humbling place to work, actually, and it also sort of strives me on. I'm always mindful that I want to do better and I want to learn more, and where would be better than here because of this incredible timeline of history, social history as well, let alone scientific history. When you look at the architecture of the building and the sort of Victorian Gothic with the gargoyles on the outside, and actually what you can see above me is actually the ceiling of an old gallery. So in entomology, we're kind of squatting at the moment, not for much longer, but we're in an old gallery because the collection is so big that there's no room for it in the modern building. So we're kind of the country cousins here.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So part of what you do is within the museum, but you also do a lot of field work. Since you've been there, can you sort of ramble off a few of the cool places you've been to collecting?
Well, in my mind, they're not very cool because they were really traumatic for the most part. People that say, "Oh, your Fieldwork's so cool. You're so lucky to go away," and I put my photos on Facebook, and there's me smiling in the jungle, but really, you're not going to put a photo of yourself miserable in the jungle, which is probably more the case than not. I've been to Borneo, French Guiana, Panama, where else? Tanzania, America. There are a few others. Peru. My focus tends to be South America, South and Central America. And I do that because the collection here is the Old World collection, so it really reflects the great British Empire of days gone by. So we have a very strong focus on Southeast Asia and Africa, but we actually have quite large gaps in our collection from South and Central America. And so part of the purpose of this institution is to represent the world's biodiversity, and we need to have a really good coverage of that. So in order to do that, we must continue to explore other regions of the world that we wouldn't have commonly gone to. And I have quite a close association with who I would call my mentor in the Smithsonian Institute, so sister organization really, and we work very closely with them as a sister taxonomic institution. And I've been collecting with him in Ecuador, and he is a very eminent entomologist and carabidologist. And for me, that was an incredible experience because this person has been working in carabid taxonomy since before I was born, and to be able to be in a situation where I've got that level one-to-one knowledge transfer is really important, and you see it a lot in science, and particularly in taxonomy, where people just they die or they move out of taxonomy, and then the knowledge that they spent all of their years building up is lost. So that's something that's quite important to me.
Yeah, especially in the field, because we can read papers and that kind of thing. I know it's not the same as being with someone, but especially being in the field. And just to clarify, do you collect everything when you're there?
I collect all insects, yes. When I was in Ecuador, I was working on a particular project which was about investigating trophic levels from the floor to the canopy. So I was working with Terry Owen, and he's famous for canopy fogging, but what we wanted to do was use a different method. So we were using slam traps, which stands for sea, land, air, malaise. And they're basically a sort of one-man tent kind of affair with a collecting pot in them. And we had 10 plots at the Tipitini Reserve in Ecuador, and we were looking at sort of 20 meters into the canopy, and then we were looking at what was flying at sort of mid-height at the shrub layer, and also in the ground layer as well. So we were looking to see what's happening between those trophic layers. And that was a very different way of collecting, because really I was only supposed to be collecting carabid beetles, but other places that I've gone to, we employ all sorts of different methods to collect, and we'll collect everything, because it's a bit of a waste of time if I'm going to go all the way to Borneo and I only collect beetles, when I'm using methods like light trapping that attract all manner of, and all orders of insects. So that's important that we do collect them, because we're going to very remote localities that are under threat. We generally choose our localities with that in mind, particularly when we went to Borneo. That was a locality that has, as far as we know, not been collected in before, but was already really under threat from logging. Somewhat ironically, we had quite a lot of difficulty with permits there, but at the same time, on the road below us, we could see logging trucks going by after hours, so illegal logging trucks. So the authorities can turn a blind eye to that in some cases, and it's an interesting environment to be in that respect, because it's not just about collecting to inform and expand on the Natural History Museum collections and also our sister institutions. It's about sort of understanding what's going on in the world in terms of the threats to natural history and these habitats that if we don't collect in, then what's there is going to be lost, and we'll never have a record of that or the distribution of those species.
Yeah.
That's really sad.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. We'll get more upbeat as this thing goes on, I promise. So collecting has been kind of, collecting of wild specimens to bring back for natural history museums and for scientific study, it has been kind of a hot button issue lately. Various papers have decried the ethical sides of it and all that, but it's also getting a little bit more difficult for geopolitical reasons. Do you think that being part of the mecca of natural history, being the Natural History Museum, do you think that opens some more doors for getting into obscure places and getting the paperwork done and having that name behind you that's got 250 years of great standing?
Well, I wouldn't like to say so, but I think so. On occasion, it has helped, certainly. I've been in a situation where I have gone through a permit process in a South American country with another international colleague and had no problem at all. But that colleague from an institution in the States has had real problems getting specimens out of the country. So I can only assume that that's because it's the British Museum. But that's a really interesting point, because part of what I do is to research specimens and their label data. We have such a wealth of knowledge on the label data in terms of I don't know, the phonology, distribution, political boundaries even that don't exist anymore. So specimens that say Rhodesia, for example. So because we have a history of collecting in, let's say Africa, I think it does make it a little easier for us to go back into those countries. And certainly it's important for us to do so because, well, for one, for the political geographic boundaries, and also because certainly in Africa as well, we think about rainforests and habitat destruction, but Africa is really up against it as well. Africa, it's the continent. People think that Africa is the country, it's the continent. So yeah, of course, very different between countries, but it's really important that we continue to build on the data that we already have, because we can look at the label data, we can go back to those locations and say, well, 100 years ago we were finding this species in this location, and now we're not, or we're finding this species in a much larger range than we did 100 years ago. Arguably, you could say that collecting methods have improved, and we have much more resources in the field to help us get into more remote localities, for one. Certainly, Darwin didn't have GPS to help him navigate, so we can certainly collect more and in more meaningful ways. But yeah, it certainly opens doors for us, and we're also, as an institution, really mindful of going about things in the correct way. So we certainly follow the current legislation. The UK ratified the Convention on Biodiversity and Access and Benefit Sharing last October. So now we, even though we would follow the rules anyway, we are now legally bound to inform countries that we are going into that we have a desire to collect their biodiversity, and also to let them know what we intend to do with their biodiversity.
So I have a two-part question. What's the favourite place that you've been to in terms of biodiversity for collecting, and what is your favourite beetle?
Oh, okay. Favourite beetle is a difficult one, really difficult. Favourite place has to be the Tipitini Reserve in Yasuni National Park in Ecuador. Having being in tropical rainforests around the world, that place just blew me away. I mean, it was, jungles are crawling anyway, but it just had this real kind of visceral sense of movement, of crawling, and everywhere you turn there was something new, and nature just invaded everywhere. It invaded the senses, it invaded my cabin, it was just everywhere. And there was one particular occasion where I was walking back from the lodge. I mean, this was a luxury. This is an incredible lodge that they have there, and oftentimes I don't have that luxury. And it was dark, I was on my own, I didn't have my camera, and all of a sudden there was this kind of scratching to the right, and I was like, crap, what is that? Because I was on my own, it was dark, and I am quite a wuss. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be brave. So I stopped, and I looked around, I couldn't see anything. And then my eyes adjusted a bit more, and there was a giant armadillo. And it was just like, who are you, young lady? It just... It stopped and it looked at me, and we kind of had a bit of a moment together, and then it just went, nah, she's no threat, and off it went, and it just disappeared into the jungle. And I mean, it sort of came up to my thigh. It was huge. I'm not very tall, but it was huge, and I was just absolutely astounded by that moment, because it felt like I'd been transported back to prehistoric times. It was such an otherworldly creature, and there I was in its environment, invading its environment, assuming that I know so much about the natural history of a South American jungle. And, you know, it's just no worries to a giant armadillo. You know, it was just foraging for the night and on its way. And I'm glad I didn't have my camera, because I felt that I was more immersed in the experience for it. And also it's almost a better story as well, because it's just so easy to say, hey, look at my photo of me and a giant armadillo. Actually, it was just a very almost spiritual experience. But that reserve and that, indeed, that area, that national park, is one of the most biodiverse areas in the world. And of course it's under threat as well. There's a huge conflict with the oil companies that manage the area and that are given leases by the Ecuadorian government. A very controversial situation, and the trustees of Tipitini are always or constantly at odds with the oil company. And something that I'd never experienced before, never considered, was we have to drive through an oil company road to get to the river, to get on the boat, to get to the reserve. And as we were driving along, our driver stopped and dashed out of the truck, and he said, look at this. And it was roadkill, and it was a rainbow python. And I mean, this thing, our driver was about 6'4", and it was he held it up, it was as long as him, and it had just been, you know, rolled over. But someone had taken its head, which was very odd. And, you know, where I come from a country in the UK, and I'm used to roadkill, which is, you know, maybe a muntjac deer or a pheasant or something. But I'd never considered that actually that's another effect of sort of human civilization or encroachment into a natural area and into a primary rainforest as well, is roadkill. So, you know, that's something else that we need to measure. It's, you know, it's not just about gas flames burning off insects and bats and any other animals that are flying about in the sky. It's what's happening on the ground, and it's also about losing that habitat as well. So that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I remember I went to Yasuni and Tiputini back in 2008 or 2009. And I distinctly remember the gate that you had to go through and the screening area, like the X-ray and all that crap, to get into the park, because the oil company controls all access into this beautiful nature reserve. It was one of the most stark contrasts between, you know, beautiful biodiverse section and everything that is not that. Just in one tiny little fence, and they couldn't it was crazy.
Yeah, really crazy. And yeah, you can't take alcohol in as well. So 3 weeks dry in the jungle, that was a challenge.
That was the worst for you.
This is the
longest I've ever gone.
I told you about.
Did you think about distilling your own?
Well, I had 80% IMS for killing insects, of course. So the odd sniff here and there kept me going.
You wouldn't be the first.
I went blind in one eye, but you know that's
Is your favorite insect actually a beetle? It doesn't have to be. But what would be your favorite insect if you couldn't name a favorite beetle?
Oh my goodness me. Cockroach. Actually, cockroach. Oh. Yeah, I love cockroaches. One of the few people in the world that does. Having had the privilege of experiencing them in their natural habitat in, well, tropical cockroaches in their natural habitat, the diversity is incredible. And yeah, they can be like this big and look like I don't know, giant mice. They're so big and they move so quickly, but they're just really quite charming. You know, they're not.
You have to live in New York City for a little bit, and then.
Actually, the first domestic cockroach I ever encountered was at Dulles Airport in Washington, in the lavatories there. Yeah, that was a surprise. Didn't expect to see one there.
Yeah. Yeah, we have those small German cockroaches, I guess. I don't know about cockroaches.
Same here, yeah.
Yeah, I know Darren Mann also loves cockroaches and has the tattoo of one. I think it's
probably some of Darren Mann's rubbed off on me, if you pardon the expression, yeah.
I'm sure. So I wanted to ask you, do you find it difficult to be a female curator? There are very few female curators in anything, let alone entomology.
Yeah. Yeah, I really do. Yeah, it's a big subject, and how do I talk about it without dropping most people I know? Well, okay, so for example, we work very closely with our colleagues in the Czech Republic, and the Czech Republic is this sort of hotbed of entomology. And very productive, very good taxonomists, and we attend a fair twice a year, March and October, which is where we do a lot of our loan exchanges, and also we send our specimens to be mounted by Czech entomologists as well. They're just very, very proficient and very reasonably priced. But the trouble I have getting any Coleopterist to interact with me it's just unbelievable. Yeah, I have one particular researcher who knows that I'm the curator of his group, so he works on the cicindelids, the tiger beetles, and he will always email my manager, Max, and Max will always send the email on to me and say, Yeji, you need to speak with Beulah, she's the curator of your group. And this has been going on for years. And it's not like he doesn't know who I am. And I don't know if it's really sexism per se. I think it's very much a male-dominated science, certainly in Central Europe. And they're just not used to dealing with women. I find that oftentimes I'm not taken seriously, particularly being blonde. That does have an effect. And yeah, I think you find that you've got more to prove somehow.
When you attend entomology meetings and there's another woman there, are you like, yes?
Oh, completely. Completely. Yeah, I'm almost a little too clingy, actually. It's a little bit alarming for those women, I think. Yeah, I have a few female colleagues that I adore, and I just feel like I can relax when I'm in their company because we can share these stories about how difficult it is. I wouldn't say that. I don't know. I wouldn't say that my career has been hindered because I'm a woman, but I've been in situations where people have said to me, "Oh, they only employed you because you're a woman." Or they only employed you because you're back then young and blonde, and you wouldn't say that to a man. and also I do encounter casual sexism in the workplace, and across international boundaries as well. And I think it's quite a generational thing. I think that people don't realise some of the things they say can be construed in that way, because, I don't know, 20, 30 or 40 years ago, when these people were in their prime, women weren't common in the workplace at all, and they were the technicians, they were the pot washers. Women weren't the ones that were qualified to be a serious scientist, let alone a taxonomist. There are very few women taxonomists per se, and throughout history. So, when I find one of them, I really want to work with them and collaborate and share our experiences together, because there's a lot to be said for the sisterhood. When I met you, Heidi, I was like, yes, this woman understands me.
And I don't even understand very much about insects, but yes.
Yeah. I don't want it to be a sob story or
but
anything like that. But it's I'm mindful of it, and it's difficult to tease apart whether people are interacting with you because you're a woman and you're attractive, or whether they genuinely are interested in your capabilities as a researcher or a good curator or representative of your institution.
Right. And every time you meet someone like that you think is interested in your research, and it ends up not being like that, it's such a hit to your confidence.
It really is. It's so disappointing as well. And that's where you feel like, I've got something to prove now. I've got to work harder, which is the positive spin on it, really. Right. I think, okay, I'll show you what I can do.
Do you think it will get better as the older people sort of move on, or is it driving?
I was like, die? Die.
I was trying to put that in a nice way.
I certainly do. Yeah, I certainly do. Yeah, we'll stick a pin in them and put them in the collection. Well, I work with a lot of young ladies that are coming up through the ranks. That they are undergrads. They may come here for an internship or whatever, and I see how they behave and how they're treated, and I look back to me in my 20s and I think, was I like that? Was I naive enough to think that the attention that I'm receiving is because they're interested in my intellect? And so I spend quite a bit of time with the young girls, just sort of saying, well, just watch out for that, and I don't know. There are all sorts of issues around it, like dressing appropriately in the workplace, for one, and should that be an issue? Should it not? And
the amount of stuff we have to think about, it is ridiculous. When you make that transition from all of a sudden realizing that not everyone sees you as like some kid who works in the lab, it is a horrible thing.
Yeah, it is difficult. Yeah. It's a difficult subject to talk about without being really insensitive and dropping people in it as well. But,
It's not to, I don't know, not to lay the world's problems on your feet and to have you be
I thought this was supposed to get lighter.
I know. Apparently not. We're this week we're diving deep. But what would be some of the advice that you would have both for young women who want to come up and get into a career in taxonomy and natural history and all the wonderful things that you and I know are the big positives of it, and also, do you have any advice or candid as you want for the men in the field on how to make it a more inclusive spot and field for women, a more equal spot?
Wow. For young women coming up through science, I think that you really have to look into the future I think it's different for men because you can go, yeah, I want to be a scientist, I want to be a taxonomist, this is what I'm going to do. But with women, it is different because we're the ones that have children. We're the caregivers. We're the ones that are going to have to give up a year of our academic careers in order to look after our offspring. As a female going into science, yeah, your family life is going to be compromised. Well, same for men in that you're not necessarily going to be able to hold down any meaningful relationships for quite some time, especially if you're a postdoc. You really have to look further into the future than the next few years, like your masters, for example, if you're an undergrad, and really understand what you're getting into. Because, yeah, science doesn't pay, for one, unless you work in medical science, for instance. When I was doing my master's degree, our course supervisor on the first day sat us all down and said, right, any of you that thinks you're going to earn any money in this profession, get out now. And we were all kind of a bit stunned by that, and of course no one left, because we were all very ideological about our profession and our passion, which is science. So it has to be a passion. If you're not passionate about it, then you won't survive in it. And I would say, know your limits, because, well, know your limits and push those limits, because you won't grow otherwise. And be prepared for failure as well. I had this job took me 3 years and 5 interviews to get. So I'm proud of that, I'll be honest, because I knew that I was the right person for the job, and I had worked over 10 years in order to get to that position. When you're an undergraduate, you see all of these cool people doing cool research, and you want it now, but you can't have it now. I think you play the long game, I think, and really be aware of how difficult it can be. And the science is the most important thing. Seek your rewards in the science that you're pursuing. That was quite wordy, sorry.
No, that was really good advice. It's very realistic.
Yeah. And then I've forgotten what the second part was.
Oh, it was just advice for other people not to be an asshole to women, pretty much. It should be fairly self-relevant, but some people need to be reminded.
Talk to these, not to these. How about that?
Right? Like, it's not 1952. Why?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I always tell guys, and I always tell Joe, like my husband as well, the one thing you can do is like call out sexism when you hear it or when you see it.
Sure. Yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
Like when someone's making some horrible joke or talking about a female speaker, you can break down any female speaker you want. Just don't talk about the way she looks or what she's wearing.
Yeah. Exactly that. I've been, victim is a strong word, but I've been the recipient of inappropriate behaviour, and my advice would be to call it straight away as soon as it happens, because you'll learn, and the person that is the perpetrator will learn as well. In this particular situation, I didn't call it, and it just ate away at me. And eventually I went to my boss and said, this has happened, it happened a while ago. And, it put him in a difficult position, because he's like, well, how do I deal with this? Because you didn't say you didn't mention it at the time. And the person that did it has probably forgotten about it, It was probably, oh, this is what we do. This is how it is in the workplace. And it wasn't acceptable. So, yeah, I would say it is so hard to call it, though. You have to be brave. Or actually, as you say, Heidi, actually shout. Literally shout. It's like, get off me. Don't speak to me like that.
It's easier to get crazy than to be like, wait, excuse me. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on here.
You're welcome. Thank
This
you
is
for having me.
fantastic.
It's an honour to be invited.
No, it's been really great talking to you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that I hope that a lot of young women and others will listen to this episode and take your advice to heart on a lot of different things.
Okay,
I think you're really good. But if that's not enough for them, where else can people find you online and follow along with your adventures and your career and everything that you're going to be doing in the coming months?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm on Twitter. You can just Google my name on Twitter. And also we have a blog here called the Beetle blog. So that's one way to follow the work of the section. Friends of Coleoptera on Facebook. So if you're into Beetles, you can join our friends group. And also Flickr. We have a NHM Beetles and Bugs Flickr site, which is really useful to us actually, because we photograph a lot of our in-depth material and put it up online, and people can come to us and say, hey, that looks interesting, can you send us those specimens? So that's one way of sort of helping us to delve deeper into the collection and get specimens identified. And there's some fantastic images and a lot of historical specimens on there as well, so it's quite pretty to look at, even if you're not interested in them scientifically.
That's always good. And then one last thing is, I think you're doing some outreach work coming up on the BBC, and you're doing some Natural History Heroes work for Evelyn Cheeseman.
Yes, yeah. I won't give too much away. Evelyn Cheeseman was, she was just mad. This woman essentially gave up her life for the Natural History Museum, to the extent that she wasn't even paid to work for the Natural History Museum. She funded her expeditions to the Southwest Pacific by writing popular books on insects, and sadly they're all out of print, which is just a shame because they're brilliant. I would recommend, if you can find them online, to read. But yeah, she is a heroine of mine because of her incredible endeavour in the name of entomology. Yeah. The amount of times that she nearly died in the name of science was quite incredible. And yeah, a woman in the 1920s, going on 1920s through to the 1960s, going on solo expeditions. She didn't need anyone. She was just going to go out there and do it. And our collection is testimony to that. We're still using, we continue to use her collection to inform us about what's going on in that part of the world in terms of its biodiversity, as well as all sorts of other sciences. So yeah, she was amazing. So yes, listen to that. Yes.
Yeah, hopefully we can. If we're not in the BBC, sometimes those of us not lucky to be in England don't get access to all the BBC's great content, but hopefully we'll have this one. So everybody listening at home, you can find links to all of Beulah's stuff. We'll have those up in the show notes, all of our social media profiles, and you can find us and all those show notes at breakingbio.com. You can follow along with us on Twitter by finding us at @breakingbio, and of course on Facebook by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. As always, we need to thank the European Society for Evolutionary Biology for giving us some money to take care of internet costs, and I hope everybody will join us next week when we have a new guest.